My name is Jake, the bully said with a smirk. Jake Morrison. And, like I said, this isn't your problem, old man. The disrespectful tone and the dismissive attitude told Marcus exactly what kind of child he was dealing with. This wasn't just typical childhood mischief. This boy had a pattern of aggressive behavior and showed no respect for authority. Marcus remained calm, but his expression grew more serious. Well, Jake Morrison, I think it is my problem when I see someone destroying another person's property and making them cry. Don't you think Tommy deserves better treatment than this? Jake shrugged and dropped Tommy's backpack on the ground with deliberate carelessness. He should learn to stick up for himself. That's how the world works. Is that what someone taught you? Marcus asked. That the world works by hurting people smaller than yourself. The question seemed to catch Jake off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered his aggressive stance. Nobody taught me anything. I learned on my own. If you're weak, you get picked on. If you're strong, you do the picking. Marcus looked around at the other children who were watching. Some of them looked relieved that someone was finally standing up to Jake, while others seemed worried about what might happen next. It was clear that Jake's bullying wasn't limited to Tommy alone. I see, Marcus said thoughtfully. So you think being strong means hurting innocent people? I think being strong means doing whatever you want, Jake replied. And, right now, I want you to mind your own business and walk away. The audacity of this 12-year-old boy was remarkable. Marcus had encountered criminals and dangerous individuals in his professional life who showed more respect than this child. It was clear that Jake had never been properly confronted about his behavior. Marcus knelt down again and began helping Tommy collect his scattered belongings. As he picked up books and papers, he spoke without looking at Jake. Tommy, how often does this happen to you? Tommy glanced nervously at Jake before answering. Almost every day, he whispered. He takes my lunch money and messes up my homework. Have you told any adults? Jake stared at Marcus's phone for several long seconds, his mind racing through his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Okay, fine, he said reluctantly. I'm sorry, Tommy. I shouldn't have taken your stuff. The apology was grudging and obviously insincere, but it was a start. Marcus could see that Jake was only backing down because he was cornered, not because he understood why his behavior was wrong. That's a beginning, Marcus said, putting his phone away. Now help Tommy pick up his books and papers. Jake hesitated, clearly not wanting to humble himself further by cleaning up the mess he had made. But, with Marcus watching and other children staring, he had little choice. He began gathering scattered papers and books, though he did so with obvious reluctance. Tommy watched in amazement as his tormentor actually helped clean up the damage he had caused. For months, Jake had seemed like an unstoppable force in Tommy's life, someone who could hurt him whenever he wanted with no consequences. As Jake handed Tommy his books, Marcus knelt down next to the smaller boy. Tommy, what about your glasses? Can you see okay without them? Tommy squinted up at Marcus. Not really. Everything is blurry. My mom will be really upset about the glasses. They were expensive. Marcus looked at the broken frames on the ground. One lens was completely cracked, and the frame was bent. They were clearly beyond repair. Jake, Marcus said firmly, these glasses need to be replaced. How are you going to fix this problem? Jake looked confused. I don't know. It's not like I can fix them. You're right, you can't fix them, Marcus agreed. But you broke them, so you're responsible for replacing them. Do you have a job? Money saved up. The reality of financial responsibility hit Jake like a cold splash of water. He had never had to pay for the damage he caused before. I don't have that kind of money, he said weakly. Then, I suggest you talk to your parents about how to earn it, Marcus replied. Tommy needs new glasses because of your actions. That's your responsibility now. Jake's face went pale. The thought of having to explain to his parents why he needed money for someone else's glasses meant he would have to admit to his bullying behavior. Marcus stood up and addressed both boys. Here's what's going to happen. Jake, you're going to walk Tommy to school safely every day from now on. Not as his friend necessarily, but as someone who makes sure he gets there without being bothered by anyone. What? Jake protested. I can't do that. People will think what? Marcus interrupted. That you've decided to be helpful instead of harmful? That sounds like a good thing to me. Jake looked around desperately, but none of the watching children offered any support. Many of them were smiling at the idea of Jake having to protect someone instead of terrorize them. Furthermore, Marcus continued, if I hear that Tommy has been bullied by anyone, including you, I'll know exactly who to talk to first. Do you understand? Jake nodded miserably. His reputation as the neighborhood tough guy was crumbling in front of everyone, and there was nothing he could do about it. Marcus turned to Tommy. And, Tommy, I want you to speak up if this happens again. Don't suffer in silence. There are adults who care about your safety. But what if Jake gets mad at me for telling? Tommy asked nervously. Then, Jake will have to explain his anger to me, Marcus said, looking directly at the older boy. Won't you, Jake? Jake nodded again, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Just then, a woman's voice called out from across the street. Jake Morrison, what are you doing over there? Everyone turned to see a middle-aged woman walking quickly toward them. She had the same dark hair as Jake and a stern expression on her face. Jake's eyes went wide with panic. That's my mom, Jake whispered to Marcus. Please don't tell her what happened. Marcus looked at Jake thoughtfully. That's interesting. A few minutes ago, you were telling me I couldn't make you do anything and that I should mind my own business. Now you're asking for my help. Jake's mother reached the group and looked around at the scene with confusion. She noticed Tommy's tear-stained face, the scattered papers that were still being collected, and the broken glasses on the ground. Jake, what's going on here? She demanded. Why is this little boy crying? Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked back and forth between his mother and Marcus, clearly trapped between his fear of consequences and his inability to explain the situation. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Marcus Thompson. Your son and Tommy here had a little accident with some school supplies. Jake was just helping to clean everything up. Jake stared at Marcus in shock. The man who had been holding him accountable just moments before was now protecting him from his mother's immediate anger. Mrs. Morrison looked skeptical. An accident? What kind of accident breaks someone's glasses? Marcus glanced at Jake, giving him a chance to speak for himself. The boy's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled with whether to tell the truth or accept the lifeline he was being offered. I was being mean to Tommy, Jake said suddenly, the words rushing out before he could stop them. I took his backpack and threw his stuff around. I broke his glasses on purpose. Mrs. Morrison's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, anger, disappointment, and embarrassment all flashed across her features as she processed what her son had just admitted. You did what? She asked in a dangerously quiet voice. Jake seemed to realize that honesty might not have been the best choice, but it was too late now. I was bullying him, he said in a small voice. I've been bullying him for a long time. The admission hung in the morning air like a confession in church. Mrs. Morrison closed her eyes and took a deep breath before opening them again. Mr. Thompson, was it? She said, turning to Marcus. Thank you for intervening. Jake, you and I are going to have a very long conversation when we get home. Marcus could see that Jake was genuinely frightened now. The prospect of facing his mother's disappointment seemed worse to him than any punishment Marcus could have threatened. Mrs. Morrison, Marcus said carefully, Jake has already apologized to Tommy, and we've discussed how he's going to make things right. He's agreed to replace Tommy's glasses and to make sure Tommy gets to school safely from now on. Mrs. Morrison looked at her son with a mixture of anger and sadness. Is that true, Jake? Are you going to fix this mess you've made? Jake nodded vigorously. Yes, Mom. I promise. I'll do whatever I need to do. Marcus pulled out a business card and handed it to Mrs. Morrison. This is my contact information. I walk through this neighborhood every morning on my way to work. If there are any more problems, please don't hesitate to call me. Mrs. Morrison looked at the card and her eyebrows raised slightly. Royal Guard Services, she read aloud. You work for the royal family? Marcus nodded. I do security work at Buckingham Palace. The revelation sent a murmur through the gathered children. Jake's eyes went wide as he realized he had been arguing with someone who protected the royal family for a living. Oh my goodness, Mrs. Morrison said, her embarrassment deepening. I am so sorry about my son's behavior. This is absolutely unacceptable. Marcus smiled gently. Children make mistakes, Mrs. Morrison. What matters is how they learn from them and make things right. Tommy, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Mr. Thompson? Thank you for helping me. Nobody ever helped me before." The simple, heartfelt gratitude from the 8-year-old boy hit everyone present like a punch to the chest. Here was a child who had been suffering in silence for months, thinking that no one cared enough to intervene. Marcus knelt down one more time and looked Tommy in the eye. "Tommy, there are good people in the world who will help when you need it. You just have to be brave enough to ask sometimes." As the school bells began to ring in the distance, signaling the start of the school day, Marcus realized that his simple walk to work had turned into something much more significant. Mrs. Morrison took Jake by the hand. "Come on, young man. We're going to school together today, and I'm going to have a long talk with your teacher about your behavior." Jake looked back at Tommy as his mother led him away. For the first time, instead of the usual threatening glare, there was something different in his expression. It might have been shame, or it might have been the beginning of understanding. Marcus helped Tommy gather the last of his belongings. "Do you think you'll be okay getting to your classroom with your vision blurry like that?" Tommy nodded. "My teacher sits me in the front row anyway. And my mom always packs an extra pair of glasses in my backpack for emergencies like this." As Tommy pulled out a spare pair of glasses, Marcus smiled. "Your mom sounds like a smart lady." "She is," Tommy agreed, putting on his backup glasses. "She always told me that bullies are just scared kids who don't know how to be strong in a good way." The wisdom of Tommy's mother struck Marcus as remarkably insightful. Perhaps that was exactly what Jake was, a scared kid who had learned the wrong lessons about strength and power. As Tommy walked toward his school, Marcus continued on his way to work. But the encounter had changed something in him. He realized that his role as a protector didn't have to be limited to his official duties. Sometimes the most important protection happened in everyday moments, when someone chose to intervene instead of walking away. Over the following weeks, Marcus continued his daily walks through the neighborhood. He often saw Jake and Tommy walking to school together, and while they weren't exactly friends, there was no more bullying. Jake seemed quieter and more thoughtful, while Tommy walked with his head up instead of looking at the ground in fear. Mrs. Morrison had been true to her word. She enrolled Jake in counseling to help him understand and change his behavior. She also arranged for him to do extra chores to earn money for Tommy's new glasses, turning the incident into a lesson about responsibility and making amends. The other children in the neighborhood began to treat both boys differently. Tommy gained confidence from knowing that adults would help him if he asked, while Jake learned that real strength came from protecting others, not hurting them. 6 months later, Marcus was surprised to receive a letter at work. It was from Tommy, written in careful 8-year-old handwriting. The letter thanked Marcus for helping him and included a drawing of a royal guard standing between a big kid and a little kid. At the bottom of the letter, in different handwriting, was a note from Jake. It simply said, "Thank you for teaching me that being strong means helping people, not hurting them. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." Marcus kept that letter in his desk drawer at work, and whenever he had a difficult day protecting important people, he remembered that sometimes the most important protection happened on ordinary street corners, when regular people decided to do the right thing. The shocking turn of events hadn't been Jake's defiance or Tommy's tears. The real surprise had been discovering that a moment of courage from one adult could change the trajectory of 2 children's lives, teaching one the value of standing up for others and showing the other that there were people in the world who cared enough to intervene when someone needed help. This. Marcus asked gently. "I told my teacher once, but Jake said he would hurt me worse if I told again. He knows where I live." Marcus felt his anger rising, but he controlled it carefully. This was more serious than he had initially thought. Jake wasn't just a playground bully. He was systematically terrorizing another child through threats and intimidation. "Hey," Jake said loudly. "Stop talking to him. You're making things worse for him." Marcus stood up slowly, and when he looked at Jake, his expression had changed completely. The gentle demeanor he had shown Tommy was replaced by the steely look of a man who had dealt with real threats and wouldn't tolerate any more nonsense. "Making things worse?" Marcus asked quietly. How exactly could things get worse for Tommy? Jake seemed to realize that his threat had revealed too much about his intentions. He tried to backtrack. "I just meant that he should handle his own problems. By giving you his lunch money every day? By letting you break his glasses? By living in fear of walking to school?" Marcus's voice was still calm, but There was an edge to it that made several children step back. Jake's confidence was beginning to crack. He wasn't used to being questioned this thoroughly or having his behavior analyzed so clearly. Most adults either didn't notice his bullying or didn't want to get involved. "You don't understand how things work around here," Jake said. But his voice was less certain than before. "Then, explain it to me," Marcus replied. "Explain how terrorizing an 8-year-old boy is supposed to work." Jake looked around nervously. More children had gathered, and some adults were beginning to notice the commotion. He was no longer in control of the situation, and he didn't like it. "Look, Mr. Whoever you are," Jake said, trying to sound tough again. "You need to stay out of this. You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Who am I messing with, Jake? Are you threatening me now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake was trapped between his desire to maintain his tough image and his growing realization that he might be dealing with someone he couldn't intimidate. "I'm not threatening anyone," Jake said quickly. "I'm just saying you should mind your own business." "I'm making this my business," Marcus replied firmly. "And I want to make something very clear to you. This behavior stops today. No more taking Tommy's money. No more destroying his property. No more threatening him. Do you understand?" Jake's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Being lectured in front of other children was humiliating for someone who built his reputation on being feared. "You can't tell me what to do," Jake said, his voice rising. "You're not my father or my teacher. You're just some random guy who should stay out of things that don't concern him." "You're right that I'm not your father or teacher," Marcus agreed. "But I am someone who won't stand by and watch a child be bullied. And if you continue this behavior, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Jake challenged. "What are you going to do about it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. He could simply walk away and hope that his intervention would be enough to stop the bullying. But he suspected that Jake would take out his anger on Tommy as soon as no adults were around. "What I'm going to do," Marcus said slowly, "is make sure that every adult who should know about this does know about it. Your parents, your teachers, the school administration. This pattern of behavior is going to stop." Jake's eyes widened slightly. "You don't even know who my parents are." "Jake Morrison," Marcus repeated. "I'm sure I can find out everything I need to know." For the first time since the confrontation began, Jake looked genuinely worried. The prospect of his parents finding out about his bullying seemed to frighten him more than any physical threat could have. "You can't prove anything," Jake said desperately. "It's just his word against mine." Marcus gestured to the children who were watching. "Actually, it looks like there are quite a few witnesses here. Tommy, are there other children who have seen Jake bully you?" Several children nodded, though they looked nervous about admitting it. One brave girl stepped forward. "He does this to lots of kids," she said quietly. "Not just Tommy." Jake spun around to glare at the girl, but Marcus stepped between them. "Don't even think about it," he warned. The situation was escalating in a way that Marcus hadn't expected. What had started as a simple intervention was revealing a much larger pattern of abuse that had been going on for months, possibly years. "Jake," Marcus said in a firm but not unkind voice, "you have two choices here. You can apologize to Tommy, help him pick up his things, and promise to leave him alone from now on. Or you can continue being defiant, and I'll make sure that everyone who needs to know about your behavior finds out today." Jake looked around at all the faces watching him. Some children looked hopeful that his reign of terror might finally be ending. Others looked scared of what he might do next. A few adults had stopped to see what was happening, though they were keeping their distance. The weight of the moment was settling on Jake's shoulders. For the first time in his bullying career, he was facing real consequences for his actions, and he didn't know how to handle it. "I don't have to do anything you say," Jake muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed. "You don't have to do anything I say, but choices have consequences, and you're about to learn what those consequences look like." Marcus pulled out his phone, and Jake's eyes went wide. "What are you doing?" the boy asked nervously. "I'm calling my supervisor," Marcus said calmly, "to let him know I might be a few minutes late to work today because I need to have some conversations with school officials about a bullying situation." Jake didn't know that Marcus worked as a royal guard, but something about the way Marcus spoke about his supervisor and work made it clear that this was not an ordinary citizen making empty threats. "Wait," Jake said quickly. "You don't need to call anyone." Marcus paused with his finger over his phone. I don't. Why is that? Jake looked around desperately, realizing that he had painted himself into a corner. Every option seemed to lead to trouble for him. And, for the first time, he was going to have to face the consequences of his actions. What Jake decided to do next would determine whether this confrontation ended peacefully or escalated into something that would change multiple lives forever. Marcus Thompson had been serving as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 8 years. At 32 years old, he stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a calm presence that commanded respect. His days were filled with protecting dignitaries, maintaining security protocols, and ensuring the safety of everyone within the palace grounds. Every morning, Marcus walked through the same neighborhood to catch the underground train to work. The area was quiet and peaceful, lined with small shops and cafes where locals gathered for their morning coffee. Children walked to school while parents hurried to their jobs, creating the typical rhythm of London life. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, Marcus noticed something different as he approached the local primary school. A group of children had gathered near the school gates, but instead of the usual cheerful chatter, there was tension in the air. Some kids were backing away while others stood frozen, watching something unfold. As Marcus got closer, he could hear raised voices. A large boy, probably around 12 years old, was standing over a smaller child who had fallen to the ground. The bigger boy was holding the smaller child's backpack high above his head, shaking it aggressively while demanding something. The smaller boy, who looked to be about 8 years old, was crying and reaching desperately for his bag. His school uniform was dirty from falling, and his glasses sat crooked on his face. Other children stood around watching, but none of them moved to help. Some looked scared, while others seemed used to this kind of scene. Marcus stopped walking and observed the situation more carefully. The bigger boy was clearly bullying the younger child, but Marcus wanted to understand exactly what was happening before he intervened. He noticed that several other children were keeping their distance, suggesting this might be a regular occurrence. The bully was now going through the smaller boy's backpack, pulling out books and papers and throwing them on the ground. A homework assignment fluttered in the morning breeze, and a small lunchbox fell with a thud, spilling its contents across the pavement. Please give it back, the smaller boy pleaded, his voice shaking with fear and frustration. I need my books for class. The bully just laughed and continued his torment. He was enjoying the power he held over the situation and the fear he was creating. Marcus could see that this was more than just a simple disagreement between children. This was systematic bullying, and the victim was clearly vulnerable and defenseless. Marcus looked around to see if any adults were nearby. There were a few parents walking past, but they seemed to be in a hurry and either didn't notice what was happening or chose to ignore it. The school gates were still closed, and no teachers were visible in the area. The royal guard felt his protective instincts kicking in. Throughout his career, he had been trained to identify threats and respond appropriately. While this situation didn't involve royalty or national security, his moral compass told him that a child in distress needed help, regardless of the circumstances. As Marcus considered his options, the situation escalated. The bully pushed the smaller boy again, causing him to stumble backward. The child's glasses fell off his face and landed on the concrete, one lens cracking upon impact. Now look what you made me do, the bully said with mock concern, stepping on the glasses deliberately. Guess you'll have trouble seeing today. The smaller boy's tears increased as he realized his glasses were broken. Marcus knew that for many children, glasses were expensive and important for learning. This bully had just created a real problem that would affect the victim's entire day, possibly longer. Marcus made his decision. He began walking toward the group of children, his training automatically adjusting his posture and approach. He wanted to project authority without appearing threatening to the innocent children who were watching. As he approached, some of the children noticed him first. A girl pointed in his direction and whispered something to her friends. The bully was so focused on his victim that he didn't immediately realize an adult was approaching. Marcus was still wearing his civilian clothes, but his bearing and confident walk made it clear he was someone who commanded respect. The children began to step back, creating a wider circle around the incident. When Marcus was about 10 feet away, the bully finally noticed him. The boy looked up with a mixture of surprise and defiance. He was clearly not used to being interrupted during his bullying sessions, and his initial reaction was annoyance rather than fear. "What's going on here?" Marcus asked in a calm but firm voice. His tone was neither aggressive nor passive. It was the voice of someone who expected an honest answer and wouldn't be easily fooled or intimidated. The bully straightened up, still holding the backpack. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just talking to my friend here." Marcus looked at the scene around him. Books and papers were scattered on the ground. The smaller boy was crying and trying to pick up the pieces of his broken glasses. The other children were watching nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Is that true?" Marcus asked, directing his question to the smaller boy. "Are you two friends?" The victim looked up at Marcus with tear-filled eyes. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to tell the truth. Marcus could see the fear in the child's face, not just fear of the immediate situation, but fear of what might happen later if he spoke up. The bully shot a warning look at his victim, a look that clearly said there would be consequences for telling the truth. This small interaction told Marcus everything he needed to know about the dynamics of this relationship. Marcus knelt down to be at eye level with the smaller boy. His movement was gentle and non-threatening, but it also positioned him between the bully and his victim. "What's your name?" he asked the smaller child. "Tommy," the boy replied quietly, still sniffling. "Tommy, are these your books on the ground?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the scattered school supplies. Tommy nodded, and more tears began to fall. "He took my bag and threw everything out. Now my glasses are broken and I can't see properly." Marcus stood up and faced the bully, who was now looking less confident than before. The dynamic had shifted, and the bully was no longer in complete control of the situation. "And what's your name?" Marcus asked the older boy. "Why do you care?" The bully replied with false bravado. "This isn't your business." Marcus remained calm, but his voice carried more authority when he responded. "When I see someone being hurt, it becomes my business. Now, I'll ask again. What's your name?" The bully hesitated, clearly trying to decide whether to continue his defiant attitude or to recognize that he was now facing an adult who wouldn't be easily dismissed. Other children had begun to gather at a safe distance, watching this unusual confrontation unfold. Some of them recognized Marcus as someone who passed through their neighborhood regularly, though they didn't know what he did for work. Marcus waited patiently for an answer, his steady gaze never leaving the bully's face. He had dealt with much more serious confrontations in his professional life, and a 12-year-old boy, no matter how aggressive, was not going to intimidate him. The tension in the air was growing, and Marcus could sense that this situation was about to reach a turning point. The bully would either back down and apologize or escalate the confrontation in a way that would require a more serious response. As Marcus waited for the boy's answer, he was already planning his next moves. He had no intention of letting this incident end with Tommy continuing to be victimized, but he also wanted to handle the situation in a way that would be educational rather than simply punitive. The morning sun was getting higher, and Marcus knew that school would be starting soon. Whatever was going to happen next needed to happen quickly, before teachers arrived and complicated the situation, and before Tommy's day was completely ruined by this encounter. The bully finally spoke, but his words would lead to consequences that none of the children watching could have imagined.